Hey everyone, was there a Jesus? Is he just a myth? Well, we're going to talk about it today with David Fitzgerald on Let's Talk with Skeptic Haven, and it starts now.
This is Skeptic Haven. Let's talk.
Hey everyone, I want to welcome you, David. Thank you so much for coming on to Skeptic Haven.
Thanks for having me again. Great to be here.
Awesome. This is my first show back after Hurricane Helene, so you get to see me very rusty, but that's okay. We will get. So the first thing I want to do is say hello to everybody, and I hope we get some really good calls in today because, like I said, I haven't been on for a while, and I'm really looking forward to getting a lot of those calls in. Next, so David, you are on here today because we want to talk to you about your books and about your view on mythicism.
Sure.
And I understand you have a new set of books out.
That's right.
You want to talk about that real quick?
Sure. Yeah. For those of your listeners who don't know who I am, I'm best known for being what's called a Jesus mythicist, making the argument that Jesus didn't exist at all. And I don't mean any hyperbole like that. I'm not being provocative. I really don't think the guy existed at all. My most recent set of books is another 3-volume set called Playing God, An Evolutionary History of World Religion. And it's sort of like the logical outcome of all the books I've been writing for the last 15 years or so. Because one of the side effects of looking into the whole historical Jesus question was having people come up to me, ex-Buddhists, come up to me and say, we're having the same conversations in our circles about whether the Buddha existed or not. Having ex-Muslims come up to me and say, yeah, we're having the same discussion in our circles whether Muhammad existed or not. And so for the last few years, it's been really interesting to, not just worry about Jesus, but thinking, maybe there's more than one of these guys who's got a dodgy backstory. So when I was doing some preparing for some talks for the Global Center for Religious Research and for the Recovering from Religion Foundation, I should just look into all the top 10 and just see if anybody else is showing any other signs of just having a dodgy backstory. And it was just a single one. I'm sorry, it was just every single one of had a backstory, to the point where now, 5 years down the road of looking into all of them, it seems to be the norm for major world religions to start with a founder figure who's purely made up, purely imaginary. And the exceptions are the ones who aren't like that. But even when you talk about something like Mormonism, we know it's completely made up. Their founder figure isn't Joseph Smith, the real person. It's the angel Moroni and the prophet Mormon. Those guys are completely mythic. So it's funny, even the ones I don't expect to follow the pattern tend to follow the pattern too. Yeah.
Well, I wonder, so I've heard that you talked about there being, you looked into several, and they all have that kind of a backstory. I know that there are people who say that at that particular time when Jesus was supposed to have walked this earth, that there were like many people who were claiming to be a prophet. Not a prophet, a Messiah.
Right.
And
that's one there's nothing implausible. Right off the bat, as you say, there's nothing implausible about Jesus or any of these guys being a real person. And honestly, we don't need them to be myths, to be atheists. We'll be just fine whether it was one dude or 10 guys behind the scenes who created the religion in question. The thing is, the more we look into the backstory of these figures, the less they look like real people. And in the case of Jesus, yeah, there were any number of wannabe messiahs in the first century. And in fact, it's interesting. One of the reasons that one of the first red flags for me was that, we've got a dozen or so of these guys who all made the historical record and none of them is anywhere near as interesting as what Jesus was supposed to have done. Even if,
Mhm.
or what he just taught, even if he was just a teacher that had no miracles attached to him, we're still seeing his teachings found in other earlier figures, Jewish figures, Pharisees, for instance, Greeks, the Cynics, the Stoics, all these things. He seems to be coming together from all these different directions, and they all seem to be composite figures, no matter which religion you're talking about, East or West.
So, right. Okay. So some people, or at least critics, have said that there's a difference between debunking and deconstructing. And if you get what I'm, my point. So they often say that mythicists, they accuse mythicists of only deconstructing rather than offering alternative explanations.
Gotcha.
And
well,
so how do you respond to that?
Well, we do offer an alternate explanation, and it's in the case of Jesus, for instance, it's that he was a mystery faith deity, a Jewish version of the mystery faiths, and we have any number of those deities that were around, before the time of Jesus and after the time of Jesus, and he just seems to be one more of those. John the Baptist might have also been a figure like that. It's possible there was no John the Baptist. It's possible there was a real John the Baptist. If I had to put my money on just one of Jesus or John the Baptist, I would say there's slightly better evidence for John the Baptist. It's a slam shut, but it's better than Jesus. And in fact, part of that evidence is the fact that he shows up in all four Gospels, even though they can't agree on who he was and what his relationship was to Jesus, or even if they were alive at the same time. And we also have evidence that for the first 100 years or so, John the Baptist cult was a complete rival to Christianity. So the more you dig deep into any of these religions, you just see some really fascinating things show up and really interesting commonalities. You see the roots. And for instance, all the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, we wouldn't have any of those if it hadn't been for Persian Zoroastrianism in ancient Persia, hundreds of years before that. Turns out, and I had no idea this before I went into this project, but the earliest forms of Zoroastrianism, what they call Proto-Zoroastrianism, also gave rise in the East to early Buddhism and early Brahmanism, which gave us Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism. So it's like, it's not the oldest religion out there. It's not the first religion, but it's the mitochondrial Eve. It's the oldest common ancestor of all our major religions today. It all comes from ancient Persia and that Central Eurasian area. It's fascinating, just really fascinating when you see the family tree come together.
That's very interesting, because I've heard anyway that a lot of those Eastern traditions or Eastern religions are much older than Christianity, but they all have kind of the same, like you said, the same foundation. That's very interesting. I had no idea.
And I assume, just going into it, that Jainism or Hinduism, one of those Indian religions, was probably the oldest of our existing top 10. And I was shocked to realize, oh wait, all these gods in the Rig Veda, those are the Aryan gods from the Iranian steppes that you find in Zoroastrianism. I mean, it's just a direct connection, and genetically, they've traced that movement from the steppes down into northwestern India, and the religion moves just as alongside the culture. It's fascinating.
That is extremely fascinating. So that kind of brings me up to my next question.
Yeah.
You draw a lot on archaeology, textual criticism, linguistics, sociology. Yeah. Which of these do you consider the most foundational? And is there one you believe mythicists should lean into more than the others?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I'm glad you talked about the sources I use, because I want to make it clear, none of these are my ideas. I'm not a historian. I have a degree in history. I've worked in history for a long time, but I'm not a historian, not an academic. I'm relying on all the work of historians all across the theological spectrum, up and down it, both believers and non-believers. For me, probably the textual criticism is what hit strongest for me, and that was the first thing that started raising red flags for me. Was in the case of Jesus, like how many of just the fact of what we have in our own Bibles, the evidence of that is damning to the official story. But for instance, in the Old Testament, archaeology is huge. Archaeology shows that basically everybody we can think of in the Old Testament, all the figures that we know and love, almost all of them are made up. In fact, of the whole Old Testament, there's really only one figure that I can think of that everybody knows that was a real person. And any guess who that might have been?
John?
Good guess, but that's New Testament. That's New Testament.
Oh, yes, that's right. That's right.
From Adam to the prophets, for instance.
I want to say maybe Isaiah.
Good. That's a good guess too. Probably the prophets probably all were real people to some extent. We don't know if they were originally prophets of God or prophets of Baal or somebody else altogether. And a lot of times there's more than one. For instance, there's 3 Isaiahs. Only one's the real Isaiah, but then there's 2 others. Same with Jeremiah, same with Micah, same with other ones. So not all of them are real. But the one person who's ironically we know exists because we have evidence outside the Bible for them is a woman who everybody hates. It's Jezebel, Queen Jezebel.
Really?
Is one of the
wow.
only in the Old Testament we can say, oh yeah, we've got good evidence for her, and we know she existed, and here's her relatives, and here's their dynasty's been mentioned here. But King David, no. Saul, Solomon, that whole united monarchy, zero. Not zero, but there's so little evidence for it that the archaeological evidence for it would fit in a shoebox. And even in that shoebox, there's nothing that is like a dead cert. It's all very speculative, and there's not a smoking gun in there that says, "Oh yes."
So would that be though to be expected based on how little technology that they had back then?
Well, that's part of the problem. Is because we have evidence of kingdoms that were before David and Solomon. We have the evidence for the Omrides, who were a century after them. We've got archaeological evidence for all these periods. And at the time when David's kingdom was supposed to be united with the North Kingdom, and Solomon was supposed to be so popular, that money was pouring into him from around the world, there's crickets about that whole time. We have nothing. Once you get the bigger kingdoms coming in and taking them over and carting them all off to Babylon and Assyria, then they start to make appearances. But it's not until a century after the time of David and Solomon that we actually can point to, oh, here's King Omri. He's the first real king of Israel, not Judea, because that was a separate kingdom. They were never the same kingdom. So there's just all these kinds of throughways in the Old Testament that just don't line up with what we know archaeologically. And the first tip-off for that for me was textually. And for instance, books like Ezekiel and not Ezra, Nehemiah. Those books make no sense whatsoever. They're clearly made up bullshit books. And you can say the same thing about the whole soap opera that's David's story, Solomon's story. All the stories about Abraham and all the patriarchs. Martin Knopf pointed out a long time ago that it's funny that all of Abraham's stories take place in just this one area here. All of his son's stories take place in this area over here. And they're all, and he made the point that, these are probably just tribal heroes, or maybe even tribal gods for that matter. Ancestral, mythical ancestors, basically. That someone's taken all their stories, put them together into one story, and put it into a Jewish concept.
Kip Davis says, I'm up. Wait a minute, where did it go? Sorry, it seems likely that there was a David who founded the Jerusalem kingdom. We just don't know anything about him.
Yeah,
that's a very good point.
Yeah, I get where he's coming from with that, but yeah, I completely disagree. Evidentially, we don't have any evidence for that kind of David. If there was anything, Saul was a war chief, and David, we get multiple origin stories from him slapped together in our Bibles, but we don't have evidence that Jerusalem started with him, with David. The term David doesn't seem to be it didn't start out as a name. It was a term for a war chief who was, once you had a victory in battle, you killed the David, the beloved, and that seems to have been where that name came from for this David. But archaeologically and textually, it makes no sense for there to have been a Saul, a David, or a Solomon. And we don't have anything solid for another century after their time.
Okay, so one thing I was going to touch on, and I started to, and then it kind of left my brain, so I apologize.
And I just want to point out that archaeologically, we don't have anything either. We've got like 2 bits of writing in all of not just Judah but Israel in that the entire time. We don't have any sense of a court or court historians, and this is something that 5 years ago, it never even crossed my mind to question that. It's like, of course there was a David, of course there was Solomon, of course there was a united monarchy. We've been talking about it forever and ever. But when the more we learn about that period, the less there seems to be anything to hang a hat on there. And Christians will latch onto evidence like the Moab Stela mentions, and none of them are 100% locks on what it said. None of them are like, okay, we have that, so there clearly was a David, or there clearly was a Solomon. We don't anything like that. We do have that for Jezebel. We have that for her whole dynasty. Again, and they act as if that's the first king of Israel, who was being called Samaria at the time. In fact, if the guys who wrote the Bible hadn't written the Bible, we might not call Israel Israel. We might call it something like Omri land, which is what the Assyrians basically called it.
I wonder if that would have also led to maybe a matriarchal society or a matriarchal religion instead of a patriarchal one.
I wrote a fictional story for that makes exactly that argument. Not an argument.
Oh, really?
It's a fictional thought experiment, but basically it says if Jezebel hadn't been assassinated, what would have happened if things had gone just a little bit differently, and if the Phoenicians had created a mercantile in fire rather than the Israelites and the Judahites being at each other's throat and getting picked off by the bigger kingdoms around them. So it's funny you say that.
So as we're talking, I'm thinking I could just envision you sitting there kind of doing some research, and you end up seeing like a curious detail in the text, and it just drives you nuts, and you just keep chasing it. That's kind of, as you're speaking, that's kind of what I'm envisioning.
It's more true than you realize, and sometimes it's funny when I'm reading like just a standard text, a biblical research text. The things they say just blow my mind, because, for instance, there was a guy who did a book on the book of Acts and how it's so problematic. It's just not true at all. And the standard biblical dictionary type research reference work is what I'm trying to say. This standard reference work was saying things like, well, for the historian, the book of Acts leaves much to be desired, but from a theological standpoint, it's wonderful. And it's like, whoa, pump the brakes. What are you saying? The they use for, well, this didn't actually happen, but theologically it's wonderful. It's like, that's swell. That's great. That theologically it has so much to offer for you. But if it didn't happen, how great is the theology behind it? And
exactly. Yeah. If you don't have any basis, any foundation, why is there even a theology to rest on? I don't understand that.
Yeah.
So have any of these?
Stop you real fast. It's ironic. 25 years ago, it never crossed my mind to question there was a Jesus. Like, of course there was a Jesus. Of course there was. it wasn't until I wondered which gospel was giving us the real Jesus, because they're not giving us the same Jesus. And it's like, I wonder who was closer, and which was just legendary accretion that came later. And as I say in Nailed, once you start pulling on that thread, pretty soon you have no sweater, because red flags after red flag after red flag just start popping up. And you realize that Christianity before the Gospels were written is a very different animal than after the Gospels were written. I had a call, and I think it was Kip Davis, in fact, who called into a show one time and said, well, but the early Christians all believed that there was a real Jesus. And it's like, we don't know that's a fact.
Right.
When you read the letters we have from Paul to the churches, and they're talking to Christians who are saying there's no such thing as a resurrection. It's like, those guys didn't believe that. But even when you look at just Paul's genuine letters and things like the book of Hebrews, they're talking about a Jesus who they're comparing to Melchizedek, and it says, oh, he has no mother, no father, no genealogy. And it's like, oh, wait, we have two genealogies for him. What are you talking about? Everything he does before the Gospels are written seems to be off camera. And you've got some Christians who believe that that Jesus is an angel, or he's an emanation from God. They don't really agree on what he did or what he was, or how we know about him. But as soon as the guy we call Mark, not his real name, wrote his gospel about this allegory, it's full of allegory from start to finish. And it's like, what if God was one of us? And that's why he didn't rescue Jerusalem, is because, well, his son had already come down and saved us all. And so we don't even need the temple anymore. But until that book was written after the war with Rome, Christianity doesn't sound like anything the way we talk about it now. Pastors now, when they talk about Jesus, they said, oh, he said this, he went here, he did this. And they quote, chapter and verse of what he did. But the further you go back, the less you see any of that at all. And again, our first four gospels, and by that I mean the gospels that made the cut, not like the gospels of Judas and the gospels of Peter and all the other ones, they don't agree on what Jesus was about, or what his, why he came to save, and how that career played out. It's stunning to see how much they disagree with each other.
So what got you started on pulling the strings that unraveled the sweater?
I was a perfectly happy atheist for like 16 years before I got curious to know what Jesus is, what are we getting, which gospel is giving us the real Jesus? Because I felt really bad for this guy who was on the cross and said, my God, why have you forsaken me? I thought, oh, poor Jesus, and the guy who was crying because he doesn't want to die in the Garden of Gethsemane, that really human figure that we can extract from that if we crop out all the miracles. And then I think one of the first things that when I realized that, oh, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's from the 21st Psalm. That's funny. And and then you look at, oh, and this is from the Psalm. Oh, and this is from Ezekiel. Oh, and this is from them. It's like Mark keeps dropping things from the scriptures, the Jewish scriptures, not telling his audience that's what he's doing. Matthew constantly says, oh, and this was done so this prophecy would be fulfilled, or this was done because in the scripture it says blah, blah, blah. Even he gives us fake prophecies that no one's ever found, and he gets his prophecies wrong, but he's constantly saying this is because of this and linking it to the Jewish scriptures in a way that Mark doesn't do.
And I remember hearing on Deconstruction Zone that he didn't even know how to speak the Hebrew language, so he was getting, even the things that he did say, the quotes that he was stealing, he wasn't even getting them down correctly.
And like Mark even has him like doing misquotes of scripture and things like that. Mark clearly was not a Jew, and Matthew clearly was. Not their real names, but the author of Matthew and the author of Mark, one clearly knew more about Judaism than the other did. And Luke, same thing. Luke tends to repeat Mark's mistakes too.
And I think there wasn't, there's some type of almost a rivalry with some of those authors, like.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, there's definitely, when we go into early Christianity, you could see there was Peter's faction and the Pauline faction. And there was definitely like a civil war going on between those early factions. But Paul's constantly telling us about there's all these other ones who are preaching a different gospel, a different Jesus. And there's ones like Apollos of Alexandria who like were a follower of John the Baptist until they became Christian, and he's constantly bagging on the people we think of as like Jesus's friends and family, who are really, to Paul's mind, the leaders of the Jerusalem church. He never calls them disciples. In fact, he never uses the word disciples ever in any context for any reason. When he talks about the hierarchy of the church, friends and family of Jesus aren't even on the list. It's apostles like him who have seen the Lord. And how does he see it? He's constantly telling us, I didn't get my gospel from anybody else. I got it from scriptural studies and from revelation, straight from Jesus talking to him in his ear, and from his studies of the Bible, of the Jewish scriptures.
So if you are watching and as riveted as I am, I love this. This is very fascinating to me. But if you don't think I'm asking the right questions, give us a call. Ask David a question yourself. We have open lines. Please give us a call. We'd really love to have you on and talking with us.
Yeah.
So there was a message that just came up. Dragons in Genesis podcast. Mark, as it is written in Isaiah, then starts quoting Malachi.
Yeah, exactly.
Good point.
Yeah. And so, I mean, we could spend all day just talking about any one of these subjects, like that pure allegory in Mark, and like things that don't make any sense, like him cursing a fig tree because it's out of season. It's like,
right?
Are you stupid? It's like, no, it's an allegory, and everything when you start going back is an allegory. Even things that look like historical reports, like his trial and his execution. I mean, Jewish scholars have known forever that his arrest makes no sense. His execution makes no sense. It's like, well, why didn't they just stone him, for blasphemy, to death for blasphemy, like it says in the Bible to do, in Mosaic law, and and the whole kerfuffle of like, oh, everybody loves him, and what are we gonna do? And all they had to do was like 2 minutes of cheerleading, and they want to have Jesus executed and releases Barabbas, this anti-Roman terrorist, basically. So their plots don't even hold up to basic story logic. And again, Barabbas and everything about that exchange, that prisoner exchange they do, makes no sense historically, logically, but it is a perfect point by point by point by point, perfect analogy for Yom Kippur, and that's been pointed out for a long time ago. Even the name Barabbas, in some early church scriptures, we have his name Jesus Barabbas. Barabbas in Aramaic means son of the father. So we have two sons of the father. One gets sacrificed, even though he's perfect and blameless. The other one gets released unharmed into the wilderness. That's a perfect description of the scapegoat ceremony in Yom Kippur. You could not nail it better than the author of Mark did for that. Yeah.
So it's very difficult then to actually marry the Old Testament to the New Testament unless you really do some pretzeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And for instance, all the prophecies that get fulfilled, like the 21st Psalm, it's like, if you pluck those 2-3 verses out of there, there's a guy who's crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me, and my enemies surround me, and all that. But he's also talking about him drowning, getting attacked by bulls and wolves and things that, and he comes out of it happy at the end. And so it's like, this is obviously not talking about him. And things about the suffering servant in Isaiah, those get latched onto Jesus too. We could, and I probably should, write a whole book just on the supposed prophecies of Jesus in the Hebrew scriptures, and how either they're non-existent, which happens more often than you would think, or they just don't add up. They just don't hold up to any kind of serious investigation. And of course, it begs the question. I mean, these guys wrote their stories to fulfill those prophecies. So it's like, historically they make no sense. As allegories, time after time after time, they're just perfect.
That's what I don't understand is when they are writing these stories. They have the Old Testament. They have those writings.
Yeah.
And yet they are pulling things out that make no sense, like some of the prophecies when they're obviously not even prophecies. They're talking about the one with King David kind of just going on in a melancholy sort of a way, and suddenly that becomes a prophecy.
Right.
It's like, why did you not do a better job?
Right? It's like the 30 pieces of silver. It's like, that has nothing to do with anything. That's just a little chunk out of the story of, I want to say, Zechariah. It doesn't claim to be a prophecy. It doesn't sound like a prophecy. It doesn't read like a prophecy. It's just a motif that they lifted and thought it was cool, and they kept constantly lifting back to Old Testament writings. I mean, we call them Old Testament as Christians. The Jews just call them the Jewish scriptures, and rightly so.
So, as you were pulling on the string, how many years did it take you to get to the point that you are now?
Whoa, to where I am now. Well, I mean, I feel like I'm constantly learning new things, and it went from just basic things to having the book Nailed come out, and that took about 10 years for that to come out.
Okay.
And that was just a slow build of just problematic things that, like, whether Christianity is true or not, whether there was a Jesus or not, here's what we know was not true about Jesus. And I kind of had I had a chapter in Nailed at the last part called "Can Jesus Be Saved?" where I list all the things that would be different for me to even think there was just a guy named Jesus. And again, nothing implausible about it, but it's just the closer we look, the less it looks like that's what's happening, what's going on with him. I like what Robert Price says. He says, when we read the Old Testament or the New Testament, whether there was a Jesus or not, the New Testament doesn't help us get any closer to him. So it's like, even if there was a real Jesus, and that's a huge if, there isn't one anymore. Bart Ehrman, who's like the biggest, oh yes, there was definitely a Jesus guy. I covered a debate he did with what's his name, Robert Evans, some guy, Christian apologist. And the topic of the debate was, can we trust the New Testament on the historical Jesus? And what a great question it is, because for the entire debate, he and I, who are on opposite ends of the yes, there was a Jesus, no, there was Jesus, we were in lockstep, like, yes, absolutely, 100%, boom, 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 boom. And it felt like I was debating this guy, this Christian apologist, and his book editor. In a sense, he was debating two people at the same time, because the editor of the book also threw in his 2 cents worth. But yeah, it's nothing implausible, but nothing. It just does not add up for me, and I'd be happy to be wrong about it. Again, it's no skin off my nose if there was a Jesus or not, or a Buddha, or a Muhammad, or fill in the blank for them. And yet, it's fascinating to me to see that, everything about from Adam to Noah came out of the Gilgamesh epic or the Enuma Elish, all these different Mesopotamian sources. Berosus, this Babylonian priest, he wrote this history book in the 3rd century BC, and all of our first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, seem to be taken from that book, not from the original Mesopotamian myths, but from this guy who basically gave us the myths in when he wrote. And that's what all the Jews and the Egyptians and the Greeks picked up on. So our Russell Gmerkin is a historian who's been working on that. He's a scholar who's done amazing work on text criticism, and he makes the argument that our first 5 books of Moses in the Bible could not have been written before the year 273 or 272, or is it 274 or 273? That's how much he's able to pinpoint the timing that it had to be, and it had to be at Alexandria and in Egypt, and the time and the place, and we know who did it. And he makes the argument that the first 5 books of the Bible were written at the same time as the so-called translation of the Bible, the Septuagint. that was done from Hebrew to Greek. He makes the argument, that's when they started putting these books together, is when that happened. And that's only a couple of hundred years before Jesus's time. So it's been really interesting to see how the Bible keeps getting younger and younger and younger. For a while, we thought, oh, Moses wrote it in like the 16th century BC or the 15th or whenever he lived. They've been swimming around to 500 years or when he may have lived. And then they said, oh, no, well, maybe it happened during the kingdom of David. Maybe it happened after that, in the Babylon exile, or just after that. And now we're like 1,000 years after what we used to say. And yes, you're right. Lots of cats. No but yeah, it's about 1,000 years younger than we thought it was. And so is the Moses story itself. Moses as a character doesn't show up even in Jewish sources until after the 4th century BCE. The first showing up of Moses isn't in a Jewish source at all. It's in a Greek source talking about a completely different character. And then other writers came along, like an Egyptian priest called Manetho, and he wrote this version of this Moses character. And our Moses character is based on that character. It's like 3 degrees of separation from the original story. It's where our Moses comes from. It blows my mind. Again, and 3 years ago, 4 years, I had no idea of any of this stuff about the Old Testament. It really it blew my mind so much that I stopped working on my book on sex and violence in the Bible to write this Playing God.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I wanted to show this really quickly because I thought it was interesting. Kip Davis says, but the oldest parts of the Old Testament almost certainly predate the 7th century. Jacob's
Absolutely.
blessing, Song of the Sea,
100%.
Song of Deborah, Song of Moses.
Especially in the case of the Song of Deborah. But what we have, like the so-called Song of Moses, or the passage where Moses, his wife Zipporah, circumcises their son, in this 3-verse little jiggliness, those are all parts like the Abraham story, like the story of Adam and Eve, that were older than that, but these did not come into a Jewish context until long after the fact, much later than we thought, certainly much later than I thought, for sure. Deborah is the other person in the Bible who could be real, in the sense that everything it says about her, the prophet Deborah, who not one of the better known figures, but nothing about what they say about her is implausible on the face of it. So Deborah could have been a real person too. It's not a lock, but we've got better evidence for Deborah being a real person than we do for David or Solomon or Saul, or just about anybody from Abraham through Solomon, which blows my mind.
That blows. I was just going to say that totally blows my mind.
Yeah. And when I first started having these red flags show up for Jesus, and 16 years into my atheism, I thought I had a lock on who Jesus was. It blew my mind so much, it shook me to the core as much as losing my Christianity had done. And that's how I feel all over again with the Old Testament. It's like, boom, it's just, there's so much that it's just obviously not true. And I talk about in the book, there's like 3 ways the Bible's in the Old Testament serves us bullshit. There's like pure flat out myth that even Christians kind of say, oh yeah, they didn't really happen. They'll never say that out loud, but they know there was no flood of Noah. They know there was no Tower of Babel, no Garden of Eden, or they're at least educated enough to be embarrassed about it, and if they were like me, they had cognitive dissonance about, dinosaurs and Garden of Eden, and somehow men hold those two. So there's pure house myth. From Abraham to Solomon, it's fiction about all these characters. And again, it's making use of older points, Abraham stories, Jacob stories. It's somebody who made this a family drama. And that's why we have so many doublets and triplets where the same exact things happens to different people. Like Abraham has this caper that he pulls off his sister, his wife Sarah is his sister, and so he gives her to Pharaoh. And the same thing happens to their son. And and that's just one example. Doublets and triplets are all over the Old Testament because these are different stories being told about different people, but they're telling the same stories and just attributing it to different people. And at some point, someone went along and made them all related to each other. And in a way, they did that with Yahweh as well, because there was more than one Yahweh. There was Yahweh of Teman. There was the Yahweh of the south, Yahweh of the north, El Shaddai, El. El was the Canaanite god. Baal was, which means Lord, was right there. There's this Venn diagram of Yahweh, Baal, and El, where they overlap so much and they like steal wives from each other and steal attributes that it's hard to tell where one starts and the other stops. And a lot of our, I was talking about the prophets, a lot of the prophets talking about Yahweh are clearly talking about a storm god. They're clearly talking about Baal. They're clearly talking about El. There's a thing called poly-Yahwehism, where there was just Yahweh became the national god. But the way the Bible tells it, it's like, oh, they kept having, it was Yahweh all along, just Yahweh right from the beginning, and foreign women would come in and seduce us in a way into false worship. It came later. And it's like, no, the opposite is true. The sacred groves, the high places, those were there all along and had been all along. And it wasn't until they came back from exile that they tried to reboot and recreate and retroactively do their own history with this newfangled religion of theirs that they brought basically out of Persia and made for their own use. Yeah.
So there, you had me thinking so many different thoughts. I'm going to try to get, going to try to go back in my brain. So one thing that you touched on in my brain was, isn't it true that some of the people in the Bible, it's really their names and what their names mean that's the important part, not the person, the supposed person?
Well, I mean, yeah, the names of like everybody in the Garden of Eden story are incredibly apt. And that's something in the New Testament as well. It's like, it's very funny that Matthew, the disciple, means disciple in his name. It's very funny that Joseph of Arimathea means that we've never found Arimathea. We don't have any record of Arimathea before somebody wrote the Gospel of Mark. It shows up 4 places in ancient world: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And before that, nothing. And it happens to mean place of the best disciple, Arimathea, and all through the Gospels they're just crazily apt names like that. That's like suspiciously apt, right on the nose.
Where it might not even make sense without that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Barabbas, perfect example. But I mean, all of it. Judas Iscariot, basically means treacherous Jew, because he's Sicari and Iscariot, and yeah, it gets kind of ridiculous really fast. The name Thomas originally was not a name. It was the Hebrew word for the constellation Gemini. And Thomas was said to be Jesus's twin. And so there's some Bible verses that talk about Thomas Didymus the twin. It's really saying twin, the twin. It's like, this stuff is so allegorical. It's painful. It's painful.
And yet so many people believe. So okay, earlier I was going to ask you why you decided to even write a book, because you had said it just doesn't bother you if there actually was an actual Jesus. And the first thing that popped into my head was, yeah, because that doesn't prove that any of the miracles happen or that God is real or anything else. Yeah. So what made you decide to write a book?
Well, what happened was I got really interested in trying to figure out who the real Jesus was. And so about very soon into that process, all these red flags started popping up. So like 2 years in that, I'm thinking, I don't think there was a Jesus at all. And when I realized I wasn't the first person or the best qualified to make that guess, Earl Doherty had been there long before me, and then Robert Price, and then I met Richard Carey around that time, and we both were just bouncing ideas off each other for that. I was so fascinated, like, really? It's all made up? I mean, there wasn't even a guy? And I just had to like point out just some of the basic ways that the official story doesn't hold up at all. And when I wrote that, I thought, okay, I'm glad I said that. It was probably the important thing to say. But what surprised me most, it wasn't that the Christians hated it. It's like, of course the Christians hate it. What else are they going to do? But it was how many atheists would say, oh no, there was a Jesus. That's like crazy talk. They were lumping that in with, Holocaust denial and moon landing and flat eartherism.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I set out to write Jesus Mything in Action, just to say, well, no, this was just, the tip of the iceberg. I just wanted to do a quick and dirty introduction to the idea. Jesus Mything in Action is like, so here's where the Gospels came from. Here's what we know about that. Here's where the rest of the New Testament came from. Here's what Christianity outside the Bible looks like. And it's like, dudes, I'm just saying, hashtag just saying, that doesn't look like there was a guy. We're barking up the wrong tree if we think there was one.
Well, I, for one, I'm glad that you decided to write the books because it's incredibly fascinating. And I was one of those, I was not so much into the camp like Holocaust denier, but what I thought was that a Jesus person walked the earth. And my view was that maybe when he said he was going to resurrect, his second coming was going to come before anyone standing in front of him was going to taste death or whatever. And but then when he didn't, everyone freaked out. And they're like, well, now what do we do? And so they kind of came up with, that he actually did resurrect, but he's going to have a second.
I remember there was a time when that was what made the most sense to me too.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if you've seen the play Godspell, Jesus never comes back. They just suddenly start saying he arose,
Right.
And that's still more a better explanation than any historical, as far as historical Jesus goes. That's still a better example than anything that that Jesus was the Son of God crowd has got. One thing Christians love to say is that every historian agrees there was a Jesus. What they hate to say is that all the secular historians think of Jesuses who completely debunk your Jesus, and they're not they're not even in agreement on who that Jesus really was and is. But they do know that he wasn't the Son of God. That's the thing. And I got a lot of pushback from atheists saying, oh yeah, I know he wasn't the Son of God, but there was a Jesus. And it's like, yeah, maybe, but here's why I don't think so. And again,
so why do you think that there's so many atheists that are holding on so tightly to that part?
Well, for me, it freaked me out when I just on my own realized I couldn't wrap my head about the thought that this could just all be made up 100%, that you could just make up a person out of whole cloth. Now, 20 years later, it seems very plausible because I see it in the Old Testament. I see it in the Quran. I see it in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism. I see it everywhere. And the same patterns, even the patterns of historians and believers getting pissed off at you for looking into and questioning the fact that these guys existed. The Zoroaster, the Persian prophet, it kind of blows my mind to see how Christians, on the one hand, they love him because he is the first monotheist. And yet, well, he is, but he's not your monotheism. He's not on board. They realize how much indebted Christianity is to Zoroastrianism. And yet that doesn't ring any bells for them saying, oh, maybe it's all made up, because the fact that you've got this Persian religion older than Judaism, we wouldn't have Judaism without this Persian religion. Ergo, we wouldn't have Christianity. That's a weird dichotomy, cognitive dissonance, where they insist that there had to have been a real Zoroaster, even though Zoroastrianism looks like it was created in the same way that Judaism was, in the same way that Christianity was, and for the same purposes. And I talk about that in Playing God. I also spend the first part of the first book just talking about not our major world religions, but all religion, full stop, from the cavemen and before to beyond, and just make the point that you see the evolution of the idea of who or what God or gods or goddesses are, depending on what level of society you're at, what level of civilization you're at. And that's fascinating to me too, just to see how these grow. You start out where everything is a god and nothing is worshipped. It's just, well, son's a god, but we don't have anything to do with it. To God is in charge of everything, but he's invisible and transcendent, and he loves everybody. He's not just a hill god or our tribe's god or this tribe's god. He's responsible for everything in the entire universe. And these are all evolutionarily shaped ideas and concepts. And again, it's fascinating to me. It's bullshit, but it's fascinating bullshit. Yeah.
I think, at least for me, finding out that not just the character of Jesus, but that everyone else could be completely fabricated is quite mind-boggling to me. And it makes me wonder how this has actually survived, unlike some of the ancient Greek myths, and I'm just,
in some ways they have survived because, like, for instance, Jesus says things that are exactly taken out of one of Euripides' plays. It's like if the Virgin Mary came down and quoted Quentin Tarantino, it's like that's happening in our Bibles, lines from a play are there. They quote books that aren't in the Bible, like the Book of Enoch and other things like that. Or they make up books and that never existed and said, "Oh yeah, you can read about it here." There were 500 brethren, and they're all alive. You can go check it out yourself. I know you won't because you're a slave in Rome, and no one travels that way for that.
So, do you think that you get more vitriolic pushback from atheists, or is
that's the ones
Christians?
I pay the most attention to. But for instance, like, it baffles me too, because like, if I'm wrong about this, let me know, because I'd like to be less wrong. But people like Bart Ehrman, Kip Davis, if you're still out there, I lump you into this category too. I don't get where the hate's coming from. I get the feeling that, oh, these guys are wrong. I get that. I love tearing up books that I think are wrong. But I don't get why atheists have a dog in the hunt of, oh, no, there was definitely a Jesus. Definitely a Jesus. It's like, show me it, because I'm just not seeing it. And the more I look into it, it's not just Jesus. All these religions, you start seeing the same patterns showing up. And it looks like they're all created in the same level of religious evolution for the same reasons. Whether we're talking about China, India, Greek, you name it. Just all over the world. All our major world religions today seem to be coming out of the same processes. And again, it's fascinating to me.
It's extremely fascinating to me because, whether there was a God, a Jesus or not, that doesn't really impact. It's not like we're holding on to a theology. It's not, like this is going to break any effect on our lives. I think what it does do is it in some really weird way shakes the foundation of things.
I think that's it.
Even describe.
I think that's it, because I definitely had that foundation shift, feeling when I first started on the Jesus thing. And I think that's exactly it. They think they know who Jesus was. They think they know what religious is and where these religions came from. And to have the carpet pulled out from underneath them once again, and it's like, it's not even that. It's not even that. Yeah, I get how it's upsetting, even for somebody who doesn't have a dog in the hunt, like atheists would be.
Have you had any direct discussions with, like Bart Ehrman or any other prominent historical Jesus scholars? And if so, how did that impact your views?
That's a great question. As far as historians, I reached out to Bart Ehrman, or I should say a friend of mine reached out to Bart Ehrman, and he very politely said, this is way early on when Nailed came out. He says, "Oh, thank you for contacting me. I don't have any truck with the Jesus myth. He just, I don't engage with it," is how he put it. And now people like Robert Price have debated Bart Ehrman, and Richard Carrier has done a great analyses of that debate and what should have come up in that debate. I would love to see a Bart Ehrman, Richard Carrier debate. And actually, what I would love to see even more than that is a discussion between the two of them. Not trying to score points, but just say, this is why I feel this way. This is why I feel this way. Because one thing about when the book Did Jesus Exist came out, mythicists like me didn't hate it because we thought he was going to be on our side. We thought it was going to be the best defense of historicity. And instead, he just phoned it in. Now, to be fair, at the time, he was writing an awesome book about forgery and counter-forgery in Christianity. But even just a few books after he wrote Did Jesus Exist, you could tell that he was already backing away from claims that he thought were firmly established as true in Did Jesus Exist. And who knows where he is now? But I can't imagine he's going to be able to stand on that branch that he sawed off himself a long time ago. How long it's going to be before he realizes that his work is some of the best mythicist theory work out there, and his work supports it as much or better than the thought that Jesus was just one more failed apocalyptic prophet.
That's so interesting. I have so many questions that my brain is just. I'm so glad that I have some written down so that because as you're talking, more and more questions come into my head, and then by the time that so I wanted to talk a little bit about the research that you did. So the first thing is, when you were researching, were you able to go in and dive into some of the original manuscripts, and did you have to learn or get at least a basic of Hebrew and Greek?
Yeah, it's just the other way around. Like, again, I am just the messenger. I went into things that Richard Carrier was doing, what Robert Price was doing, Earl Doherty. Earl Doherty was he started us all on this journey. Nowadays, it's Francesca Stavrokopoulou, it's Russell Gmerkin, it's John Barton, it's any number of other historians, and there's even Christian historians out there like Bart Metzger, and people who I don't have a lot of respect for personally, but they've done great work over here. And it's like, I shouldn't have to tell you that what you just said here isn't look good for your side, but somehow they're able to live with it. But it's very interesting. I talk about this in Jesus Mything in Action. All these Christian biblical scholars who got themselves in hot water by saying, well, maybe zombies didn't come out of the grave and at the crucifixion, like it says in Matthew. Then they almost lose their careers over things like that. Thomas Thompson, amazing. He changed the face of European biblical scholarship, and his career almost got nipped right out of the gate because a cardinal who went on to become the Pope, Joseph Ratzinger, said, "You Catholic can't write things like this. You're out." And he had to paint houses for a while before and the university in Scandinavia took him in. And meanwhile, all of Europe was following what he was saying. That the entire consensus had shifted by then about Moses and the Old Testament.
So as you were doing
down rabbit hole after rabbit hole, so yeah, when you're talking about, I thought I'm like, what was the question? What were we asking? Yeah.
I absolutely love this though, because I would much rather have like questions going through my head that just keep on going, because there's another question that comes up behind it, than to not be able to go anywhere. And this is great. So
this is why I write books too. It's because I can't keep it all in my head.
Yeah.
My ideas. I'm just the messenger. Do we need to get calls in? Because I keep seeing.
Well, it keeps saying that there's, but when I look on the call screener, I don't see any calls.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's like
if there's a caller who's we see that there's a call, we don't see the caller. So
yeah. Yeah, I have not actually seen it, and I know that when we actually do have one, we'll have the little block that'll come up below us. So speaking of that, y'all can call in anytime that you would like to. We would love to have you.
Yeah.
All right.
Can you hear us?
Hello?
Okay, so is that I can okay, yep, I hear you.
Yeah.
Are you talking to me now, Move? Like, Move, I got this.
Oh, is that
Yep,
our
you
caller?
can talk. I think so. I'm not seeing it on the call-in studio.
Caller,
What
can
is
you
your
hear
name?
us? Caller, can you hear us?
I can hear somebody.
Are you the caller?
This is Move. This is Move. Can you hear me?
I just can't. What's your name?
My name Move. I got this. That's my handle on YouTube.
Move. I got this. Okay. Nice to have you here.
Oh, I got you. I got you. Okay, so go ahead. What would you like to ask us or ask David?
I just my first time to the site. This is only the second time I ever went to a channel like this, and they usually have a topic that they start. But I didn't have a question directly. I was just assuming that you were looking for some evidence from a Christian, like if a Christian had some evidence, whatever that you might be interested in hearing about that, something like that. You can talk about that.
If I'm reading the crawl correctly, it said he became a Christian after being an atheist. It's the other way around. I was a Christian. I was a Southern Baptist. I worked at a Cambodian mission. Everybody thought I was going to become a preacher. And I became an atheist first, long before I ever started questioning that Jesus was real or not.
Yeah. For me, it was just the opposite. I was raised in an agnostic family, an agnostic town. I only remember one kid that went to school that was Christian.
Uh-huh.
And then as an adult, I became a Christian at a supernatural event, and it just led to more supernatural events. And I've been a Christian for 30 years now.
And does it make you a better person?
Yes, definitely.
Well, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. If Christianity makes you happy, if it gives you a social network, and it makes you a better person, less judgmental, more loving of the foreign and your neighbors, I'm all for it. I'm happy for you.
So I want to ask you a question, though. Say that again.
What's that? I just wanted to tell you some things that you probably never heard before, like why I believe that sort of thing. If you guys want to talk about that, I'm not sure. You guys were like expecting a question, and I was like, oh, okay, that's. I didn't think that was what the call was for.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, as long as the audience doesn't start snoozing, go ahead and hit us, and if it gets too boring, we'll let you know. But yeah.
All right. I'll keep it in nutshells, and I think there's some topics in here that you can go with.
Okay.
For starters, I've healed dozens of people in the name of Jesus, just going laying hands on them, that sort of thing. One of the main reasons why I believe in God is the Bible itself. There's a lot of lies and stuff that are going around, especially in the atheist circle, about the Bible, especially things like slavery, genocide, this and that. There's a lot of misunderstandings with that.
Well, what kind of lies are you talking about? Because I think the opposite is true. I think when you read the Bible, you see that it's clearly slavery was ordained by God. He even gives you rules for how to do it. And it says things like, if you kill your slave, well, it's your money. But if he lingers for a day or two, that's okay.
Slavery is is a system of punishment, just like famines, earthquakes, fires, diseases, that sort of thing.
But when you say it's a punishment, and he's giving you rules for how to do it, and never implies that it's not a bad thing. And what are we to make of that today?
Transatlantic slavery was a bad thing. That was the Bible strict. That in the Bible, that's death penalty. If you did a transatlantic slavery, the punishment, according to the Old Covenant, is death.
Wait, what kind of slavery did you call it?
He said transatlantic slave. The transatlantic slave is what he was saying. The slavery as we know it, as far as the United States and getting
I'm not sure which scripture you're referring to that condemns that and allows the other. But I mean, here's another thing just on the course of slavery. What about concubines? What about polygamy?
Those are the people of the Israelites. They
Yes.
constantly went against the Lord. They were not supposed to be doing those things. They constantly, every step of the way. Moses even told him, says, "You have been rebellious against the Lord since the time I've known you." And he says, "When I go, I fear that you're going to be even worse." And they were even worse.
I don't think you were listening to the part of it when we were talking about the story of Moses move. Yeah, I have a very hard time taking any of the Moses story as historical fact.
Yeah, I can't prove that, but directly with evidence.
Well, why don't you? Yeah, but there's reasons for that. It's because the evidence points in the other direction. I would love for you to, again, I am here talking about my book. I would love you to read the book and let me know where I'm wrong about that. Because when you start quoting anything from the Old Testament and saying, well, God hates this or God loves that, generally there's a point you can point to and say, this is where it says that. But I'm not even hearing that from you.
Like what? As far as what?
Well, like you'd mentioned, transatlantic slavery was something he condemns. Do you mean?
Like Christians ended it?
Sorry,
Abraham Lincoln. He was a Christian, and
who did they end it from? Who was practicing it that these Christians rescued it? They were also Christians.
There was only 1.4% of slaves in slave owners in America. Only 1.4%. That's it.
No,
there was a small percentage of them.
I don't know where you're pulling that number out, but that's
absolutely wrong.
Yeah, that's
that is
absolutely
so completely wrong.
Yeah.
You had the free states and the slave states. The whole country was divided between the North and South, and in order for
what percentage of the country do you think was atheist?
One or the other. Huh?
What? Yeah, these were Christians fighting Christians for the most part. They're overwhelmingly for the.
Yeah, there were Christians being bad. There was Christians sin all the time, but there was good Christians that beat them.
Yeah, but it was the bad Christians that had scripture on their side, is what I'm saying. They're the ones who could quote and say, yeah, I'm just doing what God tells us to do. You're the ones who have got this crazy notion that black people should be free. I agree they were wrong, but they weren't wrong because they were not following their religion the right way.
But
they were wrong because their religion said it was okay, and they were okay with that.
Was Abraham Lincoln a Christian? Yes.
Actually, he was not.
Yes,
but even if he was, that doesn't really matter. You can be good or bad being a Christian. The biggest thing is that those who were condoning slavery were using the Bible and showing scripture to justify, and they have a good foundation on that.
There's a great book that you should look at. It's called "The Bible Tells Me So: The Use and Abuse of Scripture." It goes throughout America's history, and it shows how on just about any social issue you can think of, not just slavery, but any of them, you've got Christians on one side against Christians on another side, and it's showing the scripture that they used for both. And overwhelmingly, the Christians who we disagree with and say they're being bad Christians are the ones who have the scripture to back it up.
Well, the scriptures say if you kidnap somebody, the punishment is death.
No, if you kidnap the Israelites.
And where does it say that?
That's where all your slave verses are at. It's I can look it up if you want. I'm right here on my computer.
That'd be good.
It would be great if
he hands out a lot of death penalty punishments. That's true. He also calls for human sacrifices, and even though for every verse that says, "Oh, he hates that," we've got other verses that nope, he is straight up asking for it. The story of Jephthah's daughter, perfect example of that.
There's only one time he asked Abraham to sacrifice his only begotten son. Isaac.
You're not listening to me. You're not listening. The entire story of the Israelite general Jephthah and his daughter. He doesn't. There's
He
no
didn't tell him to do that.
angel stopping
He
that.
did it on his own.
Sorry?
He did that on his own. That
Who
wasn't
did
God.
what on his own?
Jephthah
You're saying that
swore
Jephthah
that
made a
he
vow
would
to
do it,
God
but he would sacrifice.
just like Abraham on his own? And so God is
So
omnipotent hands were tied? Is that what you're trying to tell me? Why did he rescue? Why would he rescue Abraham's son and not Jephthah's daughter?
Abraham, he didn't. First of all, he didn't tell Jephthah to go do that to his daughter. Abraham
That's
and
not
Isaac
the point.
is a mirror.
That's not
of
the
Jesus.
point. Why did he stop it? Why did Jephthah, if he's following God and he's following God's army, why did it not occur to him that, oh yeah, God hates human sacrifice? Maybe I shouldn't make a vow like that. Why did that not occur to him? I mean, I have my answers. The best answer is that these are both fictional stories and they both have different messages. That's the real answer. But I mean, from a Christian standpoint or from a Jewish standpoint,
not directly, but in the word, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not murder. I mean, it's right there.
Right. Unless it's a tribe that's on the Holy Land that that God has given you, or unless they touch the ark at the wrong time, or unless they're any number of things, then you need to kill them. Trying to get a consistent teaching from God on anything, not just who should be killed and not, is a crazy making endeavor. Crazy making, because there's no consistency.
Oh, there's definitely consistency. That's why the Bible is more mind-blowing than the universe.
I don't think so. Honestly, I mean, the Bible is fascinating to me in the same way that the Quran is and the Book of Mormon. But more fascinating than the universe? No way. Not even close. I'm fascinated by where it came from. I'm fascinated by the things that gave us the Bible.
All throughout the Bible, where, like, for instance, Abraham and Isaac, right there, it's a prediction of Jesus right there in Genesis. It's the fourth event. Yeah,
say that again. Where's Jesus in this story?
And Abraham.
Say it again. I missed that completely. What did you say about Jesus? It's a prophecy of Jesus?
Yes.
No, it's not. And show me what you're thinking of, for starters.
With a hidden message showing Isaac is a miracle birth, had a miracle birth.
Yeah, there's miracle births are all throughout the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, and they're usually ripped off from each other.
Who else? Who else was a miracle?
Samuel, Elizabeth, the John the Baptist's mother, over and over and over again. It's a common trope. It's a common fairy tale trope. Just like a golden age.
I have to see some of those verses, but there's so many connections. Like, for instance, also in Genesis, you have Joseph being betrayed by his 12 brothers. The same 12 brothers are the heads of the 12 tribes of Judah. Those 12 tribes of Judah went on to betray Jesus.
Stop for a second. Stop for a second. I just want to stop.
Go on to save the whole world.
Here's the thing. Those 12 tribes, the idea that there were 12 tribes, as recent as, say, the 5th century BCE, there is no evidence for those 12 tribes existing at all. There's more than 12 tribes. And there's different Jewish scriptures that say about their tribes that they usually conflate and overlap, so that there's no one source that has 12 tribes. But the idea that came later, that there were 12 tribes, that comes from Plato and comes into the Bible. And Russell Gmerkin has done amazing work showing that that's where it came from. But all you have to do is to look at the archaeological evidence and the written evidence in the 7th century. There's and I talk about this in my book, because there's a whole group of Jews in the book, in a library of correspondence called the Elephantine Papyri. It's this Jewish colony that we have 100 years of their correspondence, their business documents, their contracts for slavery and small business, you name it. We have Jews telling each other things like, "May the gods bless you, my brother." We have no Moses. We have no Abraham. We've got none of the names that we get in the first 5 books of Moses. We have no idea that there's just supposed to be one temple in Jerusalem, because the temple in Jerusalem has no problem with this temple in Egypt being there. in this Jewish temple, and again, these are Jews, they worship 5 gods: Yahweh, his consort, and at least 3 other gods. And it may be even more than that.
The Bible says that they went and turned and forsake God and worshipped false idols.
Yeah, it says it all the time. It makes it sound like this is some new, this Johnny come lately thing, and it's not. The opposite is true. We've got archaeological evidence, more archaeological evidence for the fact that in the 7th century BCE, guess what the #1 archaeological evidence from Israel and Judah is in the 7th century BCE? The #1 by far.
I don't know.
I'll tell you, it's female goddess figurines. We have far more evidence of those than we do for David and Solomon even having a kingdom at all. At all. And again, I'm a person.
Yeah, I can understand.
If there was a David or a Solomon
right now.
It's no sweat off my nose if these are true, but archaeologically, it's
a lot of lies from atheists. Could I?
Stop. Am I lying to you? Am I therefore become your enemy because I tell you the truth? If you can tell me I'm wrong and show me, but don't tell me I'm lying. Don't call me a liar. Don't say that all these scholars are liars because they're telling you the truth about what your religion comes from.
No, those are just opinions or lies.
Well, of course, it's just opinions. But when you say lies, that's a statement. You're saying, oh, they are saying things deliberately untrue.
Someone's definitely lying for money.
What?
For sure, 100% sure. There's blatant atheist liars out there. I'm not saying that you. This is the first time I clicked on
not Christian. There's no blatant Christian liars out there. You're saying, come on.
Yeah, there's Christian liars.
You know, if you say there's blatant,
that has nothing to do with the Bible.
It has everything to do with the Bible. The Bible is full of. All right, you know what? We've gone past the point where this is informative or entertaining. If you want to shoot me an email and talk about this more and back up what you're saying with actual facts or even Bible verses, feel free. But yeah,
you let me say like 2 words and you cut me off.
Well, because you start saying things like they're facts, and it's like, let's start for a second. Again, I'm happy to continue this conversation, but I don't want to drag everybody else, all the listeners, with it, and we can keep writing. But we've got 2 more calls for starters, and we've given you more time than anybody else so far in the show. So.
It was nice talking to you. I think we move on. Unfortunately, I don't have. It's like my Colin's studio is not working. So Wes, behind the scenes, I'm going to leave it up to you to go ahead and bring in the next caller and bring their information up. So this is caller from Minnesota, an atheist. The support for Jesus' physical existence seems to be self-reverential. This is Cold Iron. Okay.
Cold Iron.
Hi, okay. Cold Iron.
Hello.
So whenever I see defense of historical Jesus, it always seems to be you cannot question this small part of the story because every other part of the story supports it, but every single small part of it seems to have that same argument.
Are you saying that it's circular reasoning? It's like
it's a web that has no foundation.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. To be fair, it's not just Christianity. Every religion operates in that same way. Of they at the end of the day they say, well, you just have to have faith. But they all suffer from the same exact kinds of Achilles heels and the same kinds of lack of evidence. And the story of how they got their scriptures tends to follow a pattern. It's like, well, they never start from like eyewitnesses. The prophets themselves are never telling us this, but people are telling us the prophet said this. And then we lost it. Oh, and for generations we didn't have it, but then we found it again, or it was restored, or angels whispered to us. But that you never can write you never can get to the original source of any of these. And again, you see the same patterns, regardless of what kind of religion you're talking about. They all do this, play the same games, and ultimately it's all circular reasoning. Yeah. So I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, I always hear arguments of Jesus has to be real because Paul said he was real.
There you go.
There you go. He was right after Jesus, and everything just points to everything else within the scriptures themselves. And what few things they try and think outside of it is like very tenuous.
Yeah, and again, it bends back on itself. Like our caller was telling us that, oh, if you read the story of Abraham, there's actually a secret hidden message prophecy about Jesus. And it's like, wow, that's convenient. And the 12 tribes, and the 12 tribes went on to do that. It's like, no, the 12 tribes didn't go on to do anything. It's like the idea of that came at this point. It was picked up by that point. They act as if this is all one big, well-founded, thing that builds on each other. If that was true, it wouldn't fall apart like a house of cards when you look at it too close. And it's like Abraham, Moses, Noah, boom, 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 boom. The dominoes just fall down. And, and it's fun to watch. It's fun to watch. It's fun to read why Ezra and Nehemiah are such bullshit books. It's fun to realize that Samson is actually a pagan god, and that he wasn't a judge. And in fact, if you just read his story, he has too much time literally chasing whores and murdering people, and not just killing them righteously, but straight up murdering them, to do any judging of Israel. That's why I love my books. It's, you wouldn't think this would be all fascinating and hilarious, and it is. Religion is not just wrong, it's hilarious and fascinating, and tells a lot of about who we are as people.
It makes me want to see someone build a case of true minimalism of these are the literal things we know. What can we actually trace going backwards? Like, none of our texts really come from any earlier than the 2nd century.
I hope.
How do we know any of that?
Well, I have a book I can recommend. I can't quite bring it up to myself. There it is. I've got a book, Laying God and Evolutionary History of World Religion, that does, in my humble opinion, exactly that. Because that's what I set out to do when I wrote it, is where do these come from? Where do these traces come from? What's our earliest evidence for them? And how they change over time. I'm not bragging on myself, but that's the book I wrote for you. You need to read that book. You'll love that book.
I have a question for you, Cold Iron. Have you always been an atheist, or were you a Christian at one point?
I grew up in a Christian household, but I didn't realize I was supposed to believe it was true.
Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny?
I grew up hearing these metaphors and stories about like how to apply these stories to your life. I didn't actually realize it was supposed to be true.
That's fascinating to me. And I know people like that. It usually seems it's women who like, okay, this was clearly written by boys, and not, which in fact is the working title of the new book I'm writing with Karis Perkowski about what a job Christianity has done on women throughout the ages. We're calling it so far, Clearly Written by Boys, A Woman's Guide to the Bible.
I love that. I've got to read. I want that book.
You would.
Thank you. Thank you so much for calling in, and please consider calling in again next week. We love hearing from our atheist friends, just as much as we love hearing from our Christian friends.
Absolutely. Thanks, Cold Iron.
Yep.
All right, Wes, who do we have up next? If anyone.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi, my name's Frank.
Uh-oh, we got 2 calls.
Uh-oh. What you doing to us, Wes?
Caller, go ahead and identify yourself.
Steve from New Jersey.
Pete, is it?
Hello?
New Jersey? Come in, New Jersey. We have you, New Jersey.
Here we go.
What's the name
Not
again?
it.
Oh, Steve.
Yeah,
Steve from-
Steve. Steve
Yes.
from New Jersey.
Okay. So you want to discuss mythicism,
Yeah. Let's do.
and you're not a mythicist. Mythicist.
Mythicist.
No.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd call myself an agnostic. I'm not a Christian. I've never been a Christian, but I'm just a nerd for New Testament scholarship, and yeah, I hold to the majority position among scholars that there probably was some guy named Jesus who was crucified, and people said he rose from the dead, or that they saw him after he died, and that's probably the best explanation for how Christianity got off the ground. So
It's certainly, there's nothing implausible about that, and that's certainly how I lived for 16 years before I did dip my toes in the water for Jesus theory. Nothing implausible about that at all until you start looking at our evidence for what that person must have been. And in fact, I kind of raise an eyebrow anytime somebody talks about the consensus with a capital C, as if it's just one monoblock thing. First of all, when you're talking about all biblical historians, secular and non-secular, what the consensus is really two very different Jesuses: the Jesus of history, quote unquote, and the Jesus of faith. And even those two figures are just placeholders for any number of other figures. You've got the Mormon Jesus, the Catholic Jesus, the fill in the blank Jesus on one side. All of those are debunked by the failed apocalyptic prophet Jesus, the rabbinical Jesus. You know, they any number of reconstructions, secular reconstructions of who Jesus was. I tend to favor the failed apocalyptic prophet stance, in that I favor any kind of historical Jesus at all. But that's not where our evidence points to. Our evidence points to a strictly, purely literary figure right out of the box, not one that evolved, not one that came out of oral tradition. And again, it's no skin off my nose. If you want to believe in that, that's totally fine. There's nothing, irrefute about it. If you want to have a discussion or a dialogue on why I have problems with it, I'm happy to do that too. But yeah, and here's the thing. At the end of the day, Steve, at the end of the day, everything we learn from both sides of this argument, back and forth, helps us debunk those guys on the other side who are still holding up the Jesus of faith, saying Jesus is real and all historians say so. It's like, no, that's not true at all. And everything we learn helps debunk anybody who tells you, like our caller a couple of callers ago did, that he knows how Jesus wants you to behave and to act and to vote. And that, if nothing else, is why it's worth it to having this debate between those who say there definitely was a Jesus of some sort, maybe, and those who say, nah, I don't think so, maybe.
Yeah. So I just have a few thoughts. There's a few thoughts. I do want to dialogue if
I'd love that.
So to address what you just said, I kind of disagree that people who hold to a mythicist position and like non-Christians are on the same side, because they both disagree that the Jesus of faith, because they both agreed that the Jesus of faith wasn't real. I think, and respectfully, I think that in a way, I think mythicists are more wrong than the religion that they're trying to disprove.
That's an interesting statement.
That is an interesting statement. I concur with my colleague. That's an interesting statement. Yeah, well, say more about that.
So so I just want to go into, like, because you mentioned the evidence. Just from my reading of the evidence, if we're talking about like the 27 books of the New Testament canon, whether it's the four Gospels or the letters of Paul or the other epistles, like they all seem to be writing about this Jesus figure as if he was a real person. I mean, I don't know if you believe that John the Baptist was a real person.
Let me put a pin in that real fast, because
John the Baptist.
Steve, yeah, let me just pause you for a second, because that's one thing I don't think is true. Because when you read the way Christians talk about Jesus before the Gospel of Mark is written, the first Gospel, it's very different from how they talk about him after the Gospels are written. And our four Gospels, for starters, they're all clearly taken from that first Gospel, Mark, but they also differ from it in very interesting ways, in ways that mythologists and storytellers do, but not in the way historians do. For instance, the Synoptic Gospels, which is all of them except John, they are largely in agreement with each other. They're either in lockstep when they're following Mark's basic gospel, or they're going off in completely, totally incompatible ways that can't be true. John doesn't even try to have his gospel match up with any of the other gospels. He has his Jesus killed for reasons that are completely different from the other ones. And each gospel's Jesus is a different figure than the other gospels are giving us. Because, for instance, Mark wrote about an allegorical Jesus, and it's very obvious from textual criticism, this is an allegory, this is an allegory, this is an allegory, this is taken from this scripture, this is taken from that scripture. Matthew liked that idea, but he wanted to correct Mark's mistakes because he was knowledgeable about Judaism. And so he makes his Jesus do different things for different reasons. He slaps on, or somebody later, editor, slapped on a nativity story that has nothing to do with Luke's nativity story, which also came later. It's the way that they are radically different from each other. And those are just the ones that made the cut. There are other Christians that wrote books in the first century and the second century, mostly the second century and the third century. And their Jesus is even more different still. Their Acts of Paul are different still. Their Paul is different still. The genuine letters of Paul, they're problematic in ways because we know they were edited and re-edited and are probably pastiches of more than one letter. But even half the letters attributed to Paul are not by Paul. They are by later Christians. The book of Acts, when it talks about Paul, and here's another thing. We have good reason to think that there was a real Paul, even though much of what we know about him is legendary. But for every reason we have to think that there was an actual Paul, we have the opposite in Jesus's case. Everything about him seems to start completely from an allegorical standpoint, and there's no real Jesus at the kernel of it. Anyway, and I've written 8 books to date about that, so there's a lot to unpack that I could unpack about that. But in a nutshell, that's where I'm coming from with that. That we're not just talking about and our sources don't agree.
Right, and forgive me. Right, you'll have to forgive me. I'm not familiar with your work.
No worries. And again,
so just a few things. I disagree that Mark was writing about an allegorical Jesus. We can get to Paul in a second, but it seems to me that he's writing about him, this Jesus of Nazareth, as though he was a real historical figure. And I say that because we do have historical figures in Mark's gospel. I mean, we're introduced to Jesus as an adult, and I totally agree with everything you said about the differences in the synoptic gospels. And John, like you said, John doesn't even try. It's just totally out there, all different. But we're introduced to Jesus as an adult in Mark's gospel. He's baptized by John the Baptist in the Jordan. And again, we have strong historical evidence that John the Baptist was a historical person.
Let me stop you there. Let me stop you there. We have stronger historical evidence for John the Baptist. We do not have strong historical evidence for John the Baptist or Jesus. The part of the evidence we do have for John the Baptist is because Jesus's story seems to be a spinoff from John the Baptist's cult. But again, it would not surprise me if both of them were completely mythical, because we do not have great evidence for them.
Okay, I mean, I only say that because of the entry in Josephus. I think it's Antiquities of the Jews. He has a whole entry on John the Baptist, and
I have a whole chapter on Josephus for sure. Yeah. Oh no, Josephus does not have a whole chapter, but he has a mention of John the Baptist, and we have other church fathers who blame Josephus for mentioning John the Baptist but failing to mention Jesus. And ironically, those same church fathers are the ones who also supposedly gave us the mention in Josephus that's called the Testimonium Flavinium, the so-called commercial for Jesus that's in the Jewish War. So yeah, the ironies upon ironies just to start dogpiling each other.
Yeah, I think I can, if I could just lay out, I think I can level with you here on John the Baptist, because you mentioned earlier about how the different gospel writers they have different takes on things for different reasons. We can just talk about how they hone in on John the Baptist, because all the gospel writers seem to they want to tie Jesus to John the Baptist.
Yes.
For example, Matthew edits Mark in the baptism scene, where in Mark, Jesus just goes to John to be baptized. And in Matthew, he inserts a little line where John says, I should be baptized by you, and you're coming to me. And Jesus says, let it be so the scriptures be fulfilled. Right. So and then in Luke, they're cousins. Like Luke just makes them Jesus is cousins with John the Baptist. And then in John, John sees Jesus and goes, here is the Lamb. And then later on in the chapter, he tells, I think, Philip and Nathaniel, this is the guy who I was talking about. He must increase and I must decrease. They all see, if John the Baptist wasn't a historical figure, it makes me wonder why the gospel writers are simultaneously trying to tie Jesus to John the Baptist and also trying to downplay the importance of John the Baptist in favor of a greater importance of Jesus. Do you get what I'm saying? I feel like it's the fiction that proves the truth.
Gotcha. I hear what you're saying. Here's my take on that. I think that everything that you see about not just John the Baptist, but the followers of John the Baptist that they have in there, every time they have a run-in with the Christians, or with Jesus himself, I should say, there's a debate about, well, your followers do this, our followers do that. What you didn't mention was also interesting in Matthew, when John the Baptist sends his followers out to talk to Jesus to see if he's the real Messiah or not. And then just a few verses later, Jesus is talking to crowds about from the days of John the Baptist until now, blah, 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 blah. It's little literary folds like that. That's okay, whoever wrote that didn't write the first part of that very same chapter, because now they're not even living in the same time. I think the reason that John the Baptist shows up so much in the Gospels is probably because Christianity was probably a spinoff from the John the Baptist cult. Robert Price wrote a really interesting essay making the argument that we know the Gospels are myths and allegories. And again, we can go all day about where the allegories are coming from in Mark's Gospel and all the rest. What if Jesus himself is an allegory for John the Baptist? And for me, that's one of the best arguments that maybe there was a John the Baptist, and that our Christianity is a spinoff from it. And there's so much more we could talk about. We could literally be talking about just this John the Baptist business all night long. Absolutely.
I'm curious, Steve.
Fascinating. Yeah. I have to go now, but it was really nice talking to you. I hope I can call in again if you're.
I would love that. And again,
please
feel free
do.
to email. Yeah, anytime. Thank you, Steve.
Please do.
Take care.
Yeah. That's what I love to see, is a caller who we don't have to agree, but we can see where each other is coming from. And
yeah, I really enjoyed his conversation. It was funny because I was going to ask him if he has read your book.
This is the thing. I want everybody like that to read it, because it's like, I used to be right there with you. And I could be there again if the evidence was given to make me reevaluate things. Because I'm constantly reevaluating things that I thought were true, before. I mean, I used to be a Christian. They thought I was going to be a preacher, and here we are.
Well, for a minute there, my call-in studio actually started working again.
Oh, yay.
I don't know what is up with.
For a minute.
We have some storms going through, so I think that might be what the problem is. But it looks like, Wes, there's no one in the queue, or is my thing all frozen up again?
We can find out. We can talk about stuff in the meantime.
Yep. If there is, just let us know. I'm hoping. Okay, we do have a call.
It says we have a
call. All right. Go ahead and bring in the next caller. Don't know why it's still not working. Okay. The existence of Jesus. Oh, we know he was. So, Frank. Hi, Frank. Thank you for calling in. You're a Christian, and you say the existence of Jesus.
Yeah. How
we know he was a historical figure. I hate having to read it like this instead of seeing it on this call screener. All right, go ahead, Frank.
Frank, can you hear us? Are you there, Frank? Yeah. Well, I mean, I hate to tell it, but like I said, I've got. It would be great if we had evidence that proved he was a historical figure. It would be great if we have evidence to suggest that he was a historical figure. But do we have good evidence for either of those things? I don't think we do. And I've got many, many books that talk about that very thing, and referring to other books and other scholars who are more qualified than I am. And again, it's fascinating to know why, to look at that evidence that's been put forward for him and for all the others too. It's not just Jesus. The same kinds of evidence and the same kinds of bullshit are spun around every single religious religion out there, major or minor.
I wanted to ask you a question. With one of the callers, I think it was I can't think of the last name.
Cold Iron.
Cold Iron, that's it. I think he was the one who was talking about that most biblical scholars do believe that there is that there was a God, Jesus.
That might have been Steve, actually.
Oh, okay. So with that, is that true? I always thought that, but I don't know that that's necessarily true anymore.
Yeah, that's another thing, is just within the last, say, 50 years to 30 years to 10 years, there's been major changes in biblical history, the consensus of it. For instance, in the 90s and the 70s to 80s, oh yay, Kristen Hood, love her.
Thank you for the 1999 super chat.
Yay. She, in fact, I keep telling Kristen she needs to write a book, because she is such an amazing. She is a scholar in her own right, and she's doing work on Jewish mythicism and just really deep dives into amazing stuff. So you have to get her on the show at some point to talk.
That would be awesome. That would be absolutely cool. We would love to have her.
Yeah.
It would be really cool to have a show with both of you on. That would be really cool.
Anytime, I would love that. She's amazing.
So we were before that, though, we were talking about biblical scholars and whether or not they
the change in consensus. Like most of the 20th century biblical scholarship was by Christians like Albright, who went with a shovel in one hand and a Bible in the other, and it's like they found some ruins and the Bible says it's this, so it must be that. We found evidence of the Bible, yay! And it's like, oh no, the walking back of that. Yeah, from the 1970s, with people like Israel Finkelstein and Neil Asher Silberman, when they wrote The Bible Unearthed, they just really blew the lid. That book still holds up so well on everything that we thought we knew about biblical history, and how no, it does not hold up. They also did a great book on David and Solomon, and since their book has come out, we even have more evidence than that has shed more light on the problems of thinking that there was a United Kingdom at all. And I think that's going to be one of the next. I mean, there's been a sea change constantly for the last few decades. But like in the 90s, the consensus was that there was a Moses and the Exodus was real and blah, blah. None of that's true anymore. None of that is true. No, we know that there wasn't an Exodus. We know that there was not a united monarchy. There's not even a debate about that, except in Jewish and Christian believing circles, the religious circles. They are locked in on that, and they're never going to let that go without a fight. But archaeologically, we know that's the case.
So if someone became very fascinated by this and wanted to take a deeper dive, well, first of all, your books is the place we need to go. Do you have any additional?
For two reasons, not just of what I say, but none of this is my ideas. I point to where I got these ideas. I point to all the other scholars who are doing all this amazing work. And there's so many of them. There's more than I could even keep in my brain, let alone. That's why I write them on the page. Megan Bishop Moore and another editor of a book called about the changing biblical history. And of course, I'm blanking on the name of the book even as I mention it. But as far as college textbooks go, the changes are coming. And the genie is out of the bottle, and Christians are constantly trying to stuff it back in. And just on every front, no matter how you slice into Judaism or in Christianity, we see the flaws. We see not even the flaws, but we see where it came from. Where and every once in a while, a piece of the puzzle will slide into place, and something that didn't make any sense suddenly makes perfect sense. And I live for those moments. And in hindsight, when you see a verse like El Shaddai, Yahweh talking to Moses and saying, "Oh, in those days I was called El. I wasn't called Jehovah then." It's like, that's a hit and a half for your ass right there. What's really going on? And it's still in our Bibles. That's the thing. It's like some of the stuff is just still right there on the page. And the guys who wrote this history, this retrocon history of their own religion and their own history, they couldn't keep their story straight. So they constantly say, "Oh, this was a good king. He wiped out all the badness. Oh, this was a bad king. He brought it all back in." Or, these good kings are constantly wiping out all the stuff that was wiped out beforehand, of the paganism and the Asherahs and the Baals and the golden calves. Yeah.
Was there any resources that you found, or like anything that was maybe not something that isn't well known, kind of obscure, that surprised you?
Yes, constantly. The whole business about how much, I've always known Zoroastrianism was like the granddaddy of the Abrahamic faith. And that's kind of like the open secret that nobody really talks about. But to see how just directly it is, and how many borrowings that we would not have in Judaism, in Christianity, in Islam, except for this. And in the Quran, when I started looking into the Islamic section of this book, it's not just that there was no Muhammad. There could not have been a Muhammad. Everything about his story, there was no Mecca at the time. It was nothing like it's described in the Quran. There was no Medina at the time. It was nothing like it's described in there. The Arab conquests were real. They really happened. But the religion that was supposedly the impetus for it all, that was invented generations later, decades later, like maybe 60 years later, 80 years later, by a completely different set of Islamic rulers.
I'm sorry, I don't know if you could hear that. I just had massive thunder hit, and it's
Oh no! Oh no!
Sorry about that.
Didn't hear any of that. I could see something was affecting you. You were getting.
I went, oh gosh. So it looks like Frank is back. I'm going to bring him in. Hopefully this will work.
Yeah. Frank, are you there?
Frank, let us know if you can hear. Duh, there you are. Yay. Okay. So you wanted to talk to us. I'm sorry? Oh, no problem. No problem. So you're a Christian.
I literally cannot hear a word he's saying. Can you hear
You
him?
can't. I can hear him, yeah. But you can't hear him.
I cannot
But
hear
you can hear me, right?
I can hear you.
Okay. Okay. Let's see if we can figure out why you're not hearing him.
You want to give us the gist of it, maybe, Frank?
So this is like
I heard something. I heard something
about the Old Testament scriptures or philosophy and that kind of stuff. My argument is just going to consist of Jesus as a historical figure, and we have very good evidence to support that, especially for someone in such a poor region as Galilee.
Okay. I mean, well, I'm not sure where to start with this because, again, for the last 25 years, I thought there was, a Jesus, and then I looked into it, and now I've got 25 years of writing that explains why I think that's not true anymore.
Okay. Well, this is my line for it specifically. I think this is good reasoning, and I think this is the reason that the majority of scholarship does hold to a non-mystical Jesus, and that's Jesus had a brother. So we have multiple independent sources. For example, we have, I will just use a secular one, Josephus. For example, it mentions the death of the brother of Jesus, and while individuals like Robert Price and Terry say this is a different one, it's distinguished very well with Christ, and it's not disputed.
Stop. Let's put a pin in that for now, because there's like Frank, there's three things already I wanted to jump on you about, but let's stop right there when you say it's very well.
Right.
It's very well. It is not, in fact. If you just read that section of the book, you'll see that not only could it not be James, the brother of the Lord, but it even tells us who it is. And it's not. It's Jesus, son of Damnius. It's talking about a completely different person. Makes no sense if it was supposed to be talking about the leader of the Jerusalem church who was supposed to be Jesus' brother. The only place that says Jesus had a brother.
I didn't get to present why that passage is talking about that. Just give me 1 second real quick to present it.
But please, Frank, please keep in mind, if I seem impatient, it's because I've written book after book about this very thing you are talking about.
Let me first present my case real quick. Then we can talk. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to interrupt you.
No, I get it.
Because I don't think you're getting where I'm going with it.
I think I bet I do. I bet I do. Go on.
So, for example, Steve Mason, leading Josephus scholar,
yes,
atheist.
He's a great scholar on Josephus, yes.
Yeah, leading one in the field. He, for example, says the passage is authentic. Josephus in the New Testament, page 293. He supports the identification of this being Jesus' brother. For example, he uses the word Christ, which is used elsewhere in the Testimony Flavium. Now that
yes, in the Testimony Flavium, nowhere else in Josephus, which is why one of the things I disagree with him about.
Well, the Testimony Flavium, and Josephus uses a unique word every 86 words, and that's actually
that's fine. But the Testimonium doesn't even appear in every citation of Josephus. It doesn't show up for hundreds of years.
Manuscript tradition, it does in Syriac, Armenian, and then we have multiple.
Those are just Johnny-come-latelys to the original. You could talk about the translations all day long.
I'm arguing from a separate passage. It's not disputed, this passage.
No, it's totally disputed. It is absolutely disputed.
Not James one.
Rightfully so.
No,
it's rightfully so.
James one not. And it's every 86 words he uses a unique word. So it's not odd to see Christ. He's obviously distinguishing it from a different.
One thing to use a different word, a unique word. It's another thing to use a word that his readers would not understand in that context and try to say he wouldn't explain it. And again, that's not even the crucial matter. The crucial matter is that it's not talking about that Jesus. and the testimonium is clearly a forgery. And we have abundant evidence that it is. Not only that, but the same church fathers who are cited as giving us the testimonium are the same ones who were complaining on paper that Josephus never mentioned Jesus.
Well, I'm not disputing the testimony of Flavium. I'm talking about the James passage. The James passage is not disputed among scholarship.
No, it is. It absolutely is.
But not the James one. But
here's the thing. When you say it's not disputed by scholars, what you're saying is Christians are without these two passages, they have nothing in the entire first century from Josephus or anyone else, not just Josephus. That's the only extra biblical witness they have to corroborate anything in the Bible. If those are gone, and again, it's not just the secular scholars who dispute it. Even believing scholars like Bart Ehrman, for example, he is a secular scholar, but he thinks there was a real Jesus. He says even if every single word of this testimonium was true, it still is nothing but what Christians were saying at the time that Josephus wrote it in the late 90s of the first century.
Well, that's not true.
Okay, let's stick with the James passage because
attributes information to many men among us. When Josephus knew the many men among us, for example, Herod's family, so he knew people at the trial of Jesus.
Absolutely. No. But he the trial. Yeah,
but even so, Paul, who knew, Paul is not disputing. He knows the brother of Jesus, and for example,
Paul says he knows the brother of the Lord. And then a few verses later, he talks about all those guys in Jerusalem as though they're fake Christians, and he doesn't even know who they're supposed to be, but he doesn't give in to them for a minute. It's fascinating to see what vitriol he dismisses those guys who we think of as friends and family of Jesus. Paul never says that these guys are disciples. He never uses the word disciples ever for any of them or anybody else in any context. Again, he doesn't list them in the hierarchy of the church when he talks about who's who in the church. What's that?
Wasn't the point of me calling in to be able to talk? I haven't been able to talk one time. I'm trying to present it, and you just keep interrupting.
All right, here's the thing. I'm going to shut up and let you talk, and then maybe I'll try to keep track of what you're saying with. But please bear with me. I've heard all these before, and they're all such bullshit. They're all such bullshit, and people say it with such confidence.
Because 99% of these passages being authentic, it's not. And you're quoting Robert Price, who's a conspiracy theorist. He thinks 9/11.
Shut up! Please.
So you can't be quoting a scholar like Robert Price is a credible voice.
Listen, if you want to make your points, make your points, because I'm losing patience with you.
Okay, so Frank, we won't talk about other people. Especially, they're not here to defend themselves, so we won't talk about other people.
Make your points, Frank. Make your points, but, and I will shut up and I will listen to them.
That's not fair. Every time I talk to you, I interrupted. It's not fair to me.
You're able to talk now. You have the floor right now. You have the floor, and you won't be interrupted. What I will say really quickly is that when you have a whole bunch of points that you're trying to get out, it's difficult because by the time that you stop, they have to go back 100 times.
So this Josephus passage is original. It's not really disputed scholarly, 99.99%. The only people who dispute it is Richard Carrier and Robert Price. Both of them are not very credible voices in academia. Now, I'm totally fine if you quote someone else, but you cannot quote these people who are banished from academia. But anyways, that's unimportant. Like you were saying, the unique word Christ, and this should be reason to doubt the passage. Josephus uses a unique word every 86 words. This is in Schmidt's new book on Josephus. So there's nothing odd about him using the word Christ. Additionally, for example, Josephus knows the person who killed James, the brother of Jesus. So he has firsthand information. The word brother.
Then what are you talking about?
Brother. And
wasn't even born then.
Multiple we have multiple witnesses to this manuscript early, Hegesippus in the 2nd century, Origen in the 3rd century, which are early who attest to this. Additionally,
stop. We don't have witnesses to the testimonium. We don't. We have many more witnesses than that to Josephus. We have no witnesses to the testimonium.
We're not talking about the Testimony Flavium. I don't care if you want to talk. We can say the Testimony Flavium is unauthentic. I'm talking about the James passage here.
Okay, and the same applies to that. We don't have any. We don't have any Christian. We have Christian fathers who complain about Josephus not mentioning Jesus. We don't have witness for either of those passages. The James passage that you love so much and it sure is real, or the Testimony Flavium, which is a known forgery. Clear forgery.
So real quick, thank you, Tons of Mice, for the $5 chat. $5 from Tons of Mike. David owns the caller without saying a word. LOL. Thank you so much.
Too kind. But anyway, Frank, keep talking.
I'm sorry I'm raising my voice a little bit. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm getting interrupted. I can't. How am I supposed to defend my point when I'm getting interrupted?
Right.
So there is a bit of a delay. The first thing is there's a bit of a delay. Second thing is you keep bringing up several points one after another, and it becomes difficult to remember the first one when you just keep going on with the second one. So just be aware. Just be aware of that.
The Testimony Flavium is irrelevant to this subject. I'm talking about the James passage. Okay? He uses no unique language. The Christ is, but he says so-called Christ. Celsus, the pagan philosopher in the 2nd century, uses the same word, so-called Christ. Okay? There's nothing weird about it. It's in all of our manuscript traditions. We have early manuscript attestation, Hegesippus and Origen. Additionally, Josephus is friends with the person who kills James. That's first-hand information. He uses the Greek term that means brotherly. Additionally, Paul uses it as well. Mark, John, Gospel of Thomas, the James epistle. We have multiple independent attestation of the word brother being used for Jesus. Clearly have brothers. 1 Corinthians 9:5 talks about other brothers. The language that Paul uses cannot mean that, and that's why scholarship has not changed their position at all, because he had a brother that's attested over 6 ancient sources that are early, that some of them knew. Paul knew him directly. Josephus actually probably knew James. Now, he doesn't say it directly, but he was a priest in the temple at the time.
He wasn't even born then! Jesus! Ugh.
Oh my goodness. All right. Okay. I'm sorry. I really have to. I love what Tons of Mice just said. His brother's name was Bob. He was in resources.
The church fathers. So the church fathers had a reason to dispute the Greek word brotherly, because the perpetual virginity. So because the word can only mean relative, they discuss other things. Oh, that's Jesus's uncle. That's Jesus's cousin. For example, Irenaeus, Clement of Alexandria, Jerome. They all use this word to try to distinguish Jesus because the perpetual virginity. But they don't say, oh, what's it called? Paul here is not using a different word because he cannot mean that differently. And we have Mark independently attesting to it. We have John independently attesting it. Gospel of Thomas independently attesting. We have an epistle from James.
Are you even following the Gospel of Thomas?
We have the Q document, which also has James in it.
There is no Q document. That's a hypothetical document. And it never existed. Jesus, fuck. Oh my God. The things that are coming out of your mouth, Frank.
Dispute. Great dispute, man.
Okay, Frank. I understand you said that you're not trying to be disrespectful or anything. You weren't trying to. Yeah, I remember you saying all of that. I get that. The problem.
I was a materialist for many years. I was an atheist materialist for many years, and I really
that has no bearing.
Even though I was an atheist, I was never a mythicist. I think it's a stupid position.
Okay, you can think that. That's fine. I do have one question for you, really quickly. Are you a biblical scholar yourself, and do you have you ever been able to read the manuscripts or anything of that nature? I'm just curious.
Sonny, that's not.
I have read the Syriac version. I can read Syriac very little bit. I'm not great with it, because I've studied the Syriac traditions regarding it. Because the Syriac manuscripts are independent from our Greek manuscripts of Eusebius. So we have manuscripts. We cannot doubt this passage authenticity. People who doubt it, that's silly. It's not disputed in scholarship. The only people I've actually seen argue it is Price and Carrier, and they're banished from academia. So until I can get a reason to see this passage, and as he said, his objection was Christ, that the use of Christ. I already told you on exactly why that doesn't make a difference. He uses so-called Christ. So, I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't know what you want me to say. Until I can get a point, until I can actually hear a point to dispute that, I don't see a reason to doubt it. And even if the Josephus passage is not authentic, we have Paul, and we have Mark independently, we have John independently, we have an epistle possibly from James himself. So there's really no wrong about it.
Frank, the things that you're saying with such conviction and such confidence are so multiply wrong.
No, they're
I need you to write them all out. So I can respond to all of them. That number itself is another bit of bullshit that I would have to respond to, because you're just giving the same old tired chestnuts that I get from people trying to say, oh no, hand wave. Yeah,
I would say
there's plenty of atheists who also with you agree that there was a Jesus. None of them agree that the Christian Jesus is the Jesus they're talking about. But when you start saying, this is not disputed, these guys are banished from academia. When you start attacking the ad hominems and ignore the arguments, or you quote arguments like saying Josephus knew them. No, he didn't, because he wasn't even born then. Don't tell me Josephus knew these guys. He wasn't even born then. He didn't write this stuff until the 90s. Come on. Anyway, let's just let it go. We're going to agree to disagree on this. If you want to get a hold of me, I'd love to have more conversation with this, but oh boy, we're going to have to do it in very small bites, because there's responses to all this. And again, I've been writing for the last 25 years responses to that. I don't know what you've read of mine, but it sounds like you've read nothing of it.
I mean,
that's fair too. But
multiple times. I've read Dr. Carrier. I think Dr. Carrier makes the best book, and I think it's horrible. I'm just being honest.
Okay. He's not on right now. When, if we're ever able to get him on the show, you can certainly come and talk to him. I'm sure you can correspond with him. He would probably respond to you. But he's not on the show right now.
Yeah, it's not disputed. We're getting the testimony Flavia mixed up, and we're also
listen. No, we're not. Both of those are disputed passages. Neither of them is on any other. It's no. Anyway, there's a delay, and that's why I keep tripping over the are we talking about this or that? But it's like your argument for the so-called James reference. All the points you bring up in its favor are at best inconsequential, are inconclusive. You and all the other defenders of it, they ignore everything the critics of the James, and they ignore what it says itself. Ugh. All right. Anyway,
I think. So Frank, I would love to have you call in another time. I think we've kind of gone as far as we can go. I think at this point, there's not much more to say.
And Frank, again, sorry, there's a bit delay. He was saying something. What?
No, I was saying thank you guys for having me on. I'm sorry, there is a delay in the phone call, so I was not trying to disrupt you. It just kind of was the way I was working with the phone call. It made it harder, and I
apologize. I apologize to you, Frank, for losing my temper.
I wish you guys good night.
All right, Frank, before you go, Frank, are you still there?
He's gone.
Okay, I just want to apologize to him, because the time lag works on me too, and I get really hot when I hear people say things with complete conviction that are completely wrong. It's just one of the.
Well, when you've spent
things.
the last.
This is the thing.
When you've spent the last many years doing all of this. I mean, you said it took you 10 years to publish your first.
Yeah.
And then there's been all these, others since. That's a lot of years immersed in this, and that makes it very difficult. Even when I'm in with my field, my real life field, it makes it very difficult when I hear things that are absolutely not true about my own field. It just, you can't help it. It's like a bomb goes off on the inside.
When they say, oh, well, you just say that because Price says that or Courier says that. It's like, have you read it? Yeah, there are things that I can see for my own eyes just from reading it. Anyway.
Yep, absolutely. Well, we've got about past the 2-hour mark, and we don't have any more calls.
Oh,
so what I would like
after that call, everyone is dropping.
They're like, okay,
the audience is going. If any of you stuck it out this long, bless your heart. I'm so glad that you made it. Yeah.
Well, I think this was an amazing show. What I would like to ask you is, what do you have? You had kind of mentioned that you had stopped writing one book to finish your newest book. So I really want to hear more about your upcoming projects. So what do you have in the works?
That's again, it probably is going to be called Clearly Written by Boys, A Woman's Guide to the Bible, with Karis Perkowski. Eventually, I'm going to get back to my sex and violence in the Bible book. But for those of you who are interested in that, it's based off of a talk that I've given at many atheist things, and it's on YouTube. So if you look up sexy violence, violent sex, the weird ass morality of the Bible, you should be able to catch me doing that. And I love it. It's probably my favorite talk. But for instance, everything I say about David and Jonathan, it's like, that's out the window now. It's like, these stories sound like we're giving you the real scoop. And it's like, there is no scoop. It's like, this isn't coming from some court historian. These are made up long after the fact. It's like, it blows my mind that there was no David and Solomon. Kappa Frank, thank you and again, I apologize for the back and forth and for a lot of lag. Yes, absolutely. And at the end of the day, we disagree, and I appreciate your time too. I appreciate you calling. I really mean it when I said I would love to continue this conversation with you, because even if we don't agree, we can at least know where, well, you see this and I see that, and we interpret this differently, or we accept this differently. But I think there's a lot more to push back on all the comments you had for tonight. And I appreciate you making them. And you're not the only person out there making them, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. So I do see in the background that my audio is really struggling. I know it's because of the storms. So I apologize for everyone for that. It is what it is.
Yeah.
I do want to mention that there is a yes, Sadie. I was trying to find. I was just going to put it on, and I didn't see it fast enough. So we do have someone in our community who is struggling, who is dealing with a lot, and we want to support her. So there is a GoFundMe to help her, and we really hope that we can raise a lot of money, that she can raise a lot of money, that she can get some help during her cancer treatments. And Sadie, we are all keeping our fingers crossed for you and sending out good vibes to you. There's the GoFundMe. Awesome.
Thanks for sharing that.
All right. Absolutely. So I hope that I can have you on again, either here or I showed the Sunday Spot that I will be revamping now that I've gotten past all the other stuff from Hurricane Helene and other things. I do want to talk about our patrons: Paul Cammish, Karen Butcher, Logan Fisher, Amanda McLeod, Ryan D. Murphy, Dan D., Michael Wiseman, me, Sunny Shell, and Phil Calderone. I want to thank all of you for supporting us. Your help, your donations and so forth, your support help us to keep this show going. Our YouTube members include Cynthia McDonald, Kelly Laughlin, Logan Fisher, and tons of mice. I love how you made that lowercase. And those are all great people. We really, really appreciate all of our viewers and our supporters. And in the meantime, remember, everyone, to always think critically. Good night, everybody.
This is Skeptic Haven. Let's talk.